Happy Hanukkah. And thank you all so much for joining us for this finale of our Modern Mind series. I want to express my appreciation once again to the Kroas, Heidi and Albert Kroa, and Anna and Bill Tenenblatt for sponsoring this exciting series. Each of the evenings, hopefully you've had a chance to attend. All of them, or some of them, have had a fantastic atmosphere. And this night is no different, as we have the great privilege to host Dr. Ruth Wisse. Dr. Wisse is a brilliant scholar, a beloved professor of Yiddish literature and comparative literature at Harvard University. A number of years ago, Wisse was a recipient of the 2007 National Humanities Medal for Scholarship and Teaching that had enriched our understanding of Yiddish literature and Jewish culture in the modern world. She's a frequent contributor to commentary. She's been a courageous supporter of Israel and also a vocal person who's combated anti-Semitism in a number of conversations and talks. She's the author of award-winning books, including those about Yiddish literature, Jews in Power, which I enjoy very, very much, and also of the book which is the topic of her talk tonight, No Joke, Making Jewish Humor. Okay, so I'm not going to make any jokes now. I try to say some to open up or inject some of them into my sermon. Some are better than others. You probably are aware, and it was mentioned by Michael Medved, that in a recent Pew study, when they asked the American Jews as to what are the essential elements of being Jewish, do you know how many people said that an essential element is having a sense of humor? 43%, I think it was, said that having a sense of humor is an essential element of being Jewish. It occurred to me that one of our forefathers, is named Yitzchak, which of course is associated with the words chok and laughter. So it's a pleasure and privilege to have with us Dr. Ruth Wisse to speak to us about the phenomenon of Jewish humor.
Wonderful privilege to come here and to be able to speak to you about this book. And this looks like a wonderful congregation indeed, so thank you to Rabbi Posey, and thank you for having me in for this wonderful introduction. So I think that everybody agrees, and not just the Jews, that humor is the way to live a better life. And now we have reports from the medical community which support this, and I just quote to you on the studies of the effects of laughter on the immune system by Drs. Lee Burke and Stanley Tan. And this is the kind of thing that they write. Laughing lowers blood pressure, reduces stress hormones, increases muscle flexion, and boosts immune function by raising levels of infection-fighting T cells, disease-fighting proteins called gamma, interferon, and B cells, which produce disease-destroying antibodies. Laughter also triggers the release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, and produces a general sense of well-being, and so forth. So this is scientific confirmation to tell us what we know through personal experience, which is why I begin the book that I wrote, No Joke, with a joke. And it's a joke that was told, and I will tell you the circumstances. It was told to me after I had spoken in the synagogue, not about humor, but about something else, and a gentleman came over to me from the audience afterwards, and he said, you know, I really enjoyed your talk, and I'm going to give you a gift. And the gift that he gave me was this joke, which was brand new when he told it to me. It's now very old because jokes circulate very quickly, and this one was taken up by a great many people, and you don't even have to give attribution because there's still no copyright on joking. So the next morning after this, I was in the office of the Jewish Studies program at Harvard, and my colleagues were there, as it happened, just picking up their mail at the same time, and I said, do I have a gift for you? And I told them this, which you won't laugh because I think that many of you probably have heard it 100 times by now. So, 4 Europeans go hiking in the mountains together, and they get totally lost, and they run out of all their food, and they run out of all their water, improbable as it may seem, and they're desperate. And the Brit says, I'm so thirsty, I must have tea. And the Frenchman says, I'm so thirsty, I must have wine. And the German says, I'm so thirsty, I must have beer. And the Jew says, I'm so thirsty, I must have diabetes. So, okay. I guess California is very far away from Boston, which is my good fortune here. So, you can see that this was terrific. So they laughed, and I was so happy because my husband is a very good joke teller, but I'm not really the one who tells jokes in our family. I'm usually a straight man. So I enjoyed this, my colleagues enjoyed it, and as I was walking out of the office afterwards, the secretary stopped me, and all of this is true as it happens, and she said, do you mind if I ask you something, please? She said, you know, I found that really disturbing. She said, and this was a girl, a wonderful girl. She actually was somebody who was dating a Jewish guy in the office, and she had been reading works of Jewish literature and had asked me about some of them, so I knew that she was a serious person. Of course, I stayed and talked to her, and she said, you know, I found this joke. First of all, I didn't see anything that was at all funny about it. And if you weren't Jewish, I would have thought it was anti-Semitic. So I thought, you know, that this is really something that it requires investigation. So since she asked me about the joke, I tried in my sort of professorial way to tell her, well, look, a joke works if you want to know how the joke works. It works this way. You repeat the word have, I must have, 3 times in a certain way, and it raises expectations. The joke always works by breaking the expectation the last time, twisting it, and it's twists in this case by using the word have in a different way. Instead of having a drink or something, having an infection, having diabetes. And I said to her, you know, it's incongruous, jokes work with incongruity, and on in this vein. Does it make any difference? I mean, she understood that what I wanted to do, but you understand that what the joke was about, it was about Jewish anxieties, basically. And that's one of the things that Jews laugh at. They laugh at their anxieties. And one of the things that humor does, as the doctors tell us, is that it alleviates anxieties in this way. It sort of punctures them. First, it builds up the anxiety, I must have, people don't have a drink, and then it punctures them. And I sort of think to myself, you know, a Jew in the company of Europeans has enough to be worried about, right? So this, you know, it hits a funny bone. But the fact is that what made it more so, even more than the joke itself and everything that you can explain about it, what was great is precisely what put her off. And this was what was strange. Why did we have such a good feeling about it? And I think it's because we got it together. It made us into a unit. Joking is not the kind of thing that one does for oneself, laughing. Joking is often the kind of thing that turns us into a kind of a unit because we laugh at the same things. So in addition to the release of the laughter, there's this idea of the pleasure of the bond that it creates. Singing together is that way. Praying together is certainly that way. It supplies something of the same group pleasure, but the individual mental activity of joking adds a dimension to the collective pleasure. And I think that given the erosion of so many communal bonds among us, and especially Jews, who really have less and less, not in a community like this synagogue, I imagine, but basically in America, who have less and less in common with one another. If the joke works among Jews, it sort of says to ourselves, hey, you know, there we all are, we're all Jews, we get it. I mean, this is not what we say when we're laughing, but this is what our laughter expresses. And I think it's one of the great pleasures, the great additional pleasures of getting a joke together in a community. So since this is this season of the year, I will tell you another one that works in precisely this same kind of way. So this is a flight to Israel, an El Al flight, at just about this season of the year. And the plane is about to land at Ben Gurion Airport, and the captain says, this is your captain speaking. This is the culmination of El Al flight 871, and we welcome you to Ben Gurion Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the plane is at a complete standstill and the seatbelt signs have been turned off. And for those of you who are still seated, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Just joking. So this is, you know, another one. So it too builds on, you know, if you want to look at it, the anxiety of Jews at Christmas time who don't fit in. Well, and which way does this joke turn? Who's it really laughing at? What is it making fun of? So the most obvious thing is, of course, it's making fun of the fact that Jews would never listen to that kind of instruction, right? So there they are, you know, doing what they're told not to do, and so eager to get off the plane, or just always in a hurry and so forth. So they don't listen to the instructions. They're self-critical and they're self-defining. It makes fun of Jewish rudeness and impatience and pushiness and all those things. But I wonder if that's the whole of it, because it seems to me that it also congratulates Jews in a certain way for qualities that make up what two people have recently called the startup nation. I mean, the same qualities that make Israelis into entrepreneurs and that make Jews think out of the box and that make you just reach for new things is exactly the same thing, the same kind of qualities that make you pushy and not listen to instructions so carefully and so forth. So this is the way this Jewish joking, Jewish humor works. The pleasure is individual, you get it, you have to figure it out very quickly, and then, wow, you know, it's so funny when you see how the thing turns, and then it's collective, it forms us into a community. And in our time, it's a way of reinforcing identity. And I think Jews use it that way, as a way of reinforcing identity among us. So usually one does have to differentiate between laughing at something and laughing with something. The secretary thought we were laughing at Jews. But we were laughing at Jews, yes, but Jewish humor works in a way that we laugh at and with at the same time. And it is reinforcing at the same time as it's self-critical. It's an amazingly interesting thing. Now, the person I think who wrote most intelligently about this, most incisively about this, you won't be surprised perhaps to know, was Sigmund Freud. His book, Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious, or Wit and its relation to the unconscious, is one of the greatest works on humor that I know. And he was a great collector of Jewish joking, and in fact, he brings an earlier example of the El Al joke, just to show you how things continue, but they just change their nature. And he includes this joke in his analysis, in his book. So a Galician Jew was traveling in a train, and when Freud uses this term, a Galicianer Jew was traveling, what this would have indicated is that this was a person dressed more traditionally. The Galicianer Jew is dressed like a chassid. He's dressed more traditionally. And so he had made himself very comfortable in this train compartment. He had unbuttoned his coat and he had put his foot up on the seat. And just then, a gentleman in modern clothing came into the train compartment. So the Jew promptly pulled himself together and took up a proper pose. The stranger, in the meantime, started fingering through a little booklet that he had with him, a notebook that he had with him. He made some calculations, he reflected for a moment, and then suddenly he asked the Jew, "Excuse me, when is Yom Kippur this year?" "Oh," said the Galicianer, and puts his feet back up on his So, you see the same, you see how similar these two jokes are. So, and again, plays on the same thing, that when we're with one another, we don't have to worry, we can have bad manners, we can do whatever we like, but when we're in the presence of a Gentile, well, then we have to hold ourselves straight, and we have to try a little harder, and we have to pretend a little bit more. What Freud says about this joke is very interesting. He says that it shows the democratizing feature of Jewish life. He shows how democratic Jewish life is. So isn't this interesting? Of course it's a joke that makes fun of the bad manners of the Jew to begin with. It makes fun of his fear of Gentiles as well. But Freud sees this other aspect of it as well, that this tells us how democratic the Jews are, that once he's comfortable with a fellow Jew, he can do whatever he wants. This is his take on it. So we have our identity that differentiates us from others. And this is one of the aspects of Jewish joking which becomes really precious. And actually, at that point in his analysis, Freud has this following spectacular sentence. He says, incidentally, "I don't know whether there are many other instances of a people making fun to such a degree of its own character." I think that stands in the analysis of humor. Of course, you only have to say a sentence and somebody else is going to say, "No, it isn't so." And indeed, you had professors, researchers saying, "No, I don't think that's right. Let's see Scottish humor if it does the same." And guess what? The truth is that Freud was right. There is no example of a people making fun to such a degree and in such a profoundly different number of ways of its own character as the Jews. So I think that we can see how this works in America. One of the wonderful things of living in America is that it is a profoundly democratizing society. Jews have come to feel more at home here than I think they've ever felt in any country in the diaspora, and rightly so. However, one of the things you find in democratic society, and one of its pitfalls, is that the culture becomes, it finds it hard to sustain and appreciate differentiation. I am tolerant of everything. The only thing that I may be intolerant of is your desire to remain separate and different from me. If I'm so tolerant, and I'm so wonderful, and I'm so great, why in the world do you want to stay separate from me? And the more complicated thing is not the people who stay separate in Muncie or who stay separate in ultra-Orthodox communities speaking their own languages and so on, or like the Amish or something. Well, you sort of say, okay, that's, but people who live among me, you know, us, and don't celebrate Christmas, and I mean, you know, why would you do that? Why would you want to keep yourself apart? And this anxiety is old, and yet in every hospitable exile, in every hospitable diaspora, it takes this strange form of a kind of guilt that one is not a universalist, that one is not a communitarian, that, of course, You can embrace all humanity on one level, but you do want to keep yourself separate. And I think that the kindly receptionist is a creature of multiculturalism, which may sound as if it wants to keep all cultures separate, but multiculturalism in this sense is really, multiculturalism wants us all to be together. I don't know whether you ever saw those wonderful Sesame Street things of those kids with all of them different colors, different shades. One is Asian, one is black, one is white, and so on. And they're all singing, all together now, like the Beatles, all together now, all together now, all together now. And this is the great American ideal. So Jews are a tribal people, a familial people, chosen to live with a very difficult contractual arrangement with God. And the meaning of Jewish life is drawn from the way one has chosen to live that way of life. And that way of life has given Jews a great many advantages over many, many centuries, advantages of greater literacy, a kind of enterprise, communal responsibility. Jews are amazing in this sense, that anyone who wants to can become a Jew. But the interesting thing is that Jews do not feel that everyone has to become a Jew. Now, this is an amazing balance to be able to sustain. You know, I say these things because I don't think the Jews really appreciate very much about the complexity of their nature in some ways. But this is really odd. There are many people who want you to become like them, but you know, other religions rather think that you have to become like them. So here's this strangely, this familial, this tribal thing that Torah Jewishness is not necessarily a universalizing religion. Jews don't have to conquer others. Neither, however, do they allow themselves to be absorbed completely by others. So if I'm right about this, this means that one lives always in a state of tremendous tension. Tremendous tension of being like others, tolerating them, living among them, adapting to them, adapting to their language, adapting to their way of life, adapting to anything that's possible to take advantage of, and contributing to the society as much as one can contribute to it, but at the same time saying no to intermarriage, no to adopting other people's holidays and other people's calendar to a full degree. So the pleasures of this kind of intimacy used to once be expressed in a way of life that was very different and that had a different language, had a language of its own. This gentleman was speaking before about the pleasures of Yiddish. Well, for hundreds of years, the Jews of Europe spoke Yiddish, which in itself was an expression of the degree of separation that they maintained from the rest of society. But we don't. We speak English. And when you speak this common language with everyone else, to what extent do we have a private language? So I think that this is one of the amazing things that joking, that Jewish humor does. Jewish humor is a kind of private language, or a kind of semi-private language that Jews maintain within the common language. And if you look at Jewish joking, you see that there are certain kinds of Jewish jokes, like those two with which I began, that really are incomprehensible. They are not for a non-Jewish audience. The kind of twist that they take is not going to appeal to non-Jews who don't see what is so funny about Jews standing up on an El Al flight when they should be seated. So now there's really, I think that one of the keys to this is really anxiety, and how does that work? Well, it was always the case. By the end of the 19th century, one of the ways in which I came to this subject is because I teach Yiddish literature, and there's a tremendous, much more humor in Yiddish folklore than there is, I think, in American Jewish culture and Jewish folklore. And so at the end of the 19th century, you began to have collections of Jewish humor. Not one, not two, not three, but many collections of Jewish humor where great minds, great thinkers would put together a book of Jewish humor and jokes. Now, one of the categories in some of these books of jokes, converts. Jokes about converts. Of course, there are jokes about rabbis, there are jokes about wives, there are jokes about, various things that we still joke about. But converts, because at that point, there were hundreds, thousands of Jews who were converting, right? It was, today in America, you don't find that there are so many Jews who are converting to Christianity or converting to Islam or converting to another religion. They just moved to Denver. And, in Denver, you have to work very hard to be a Jew, right? It's very easy just to mix in and nobody will know who you are. So in those days of conversion, you had this anxiety. So four Jews, again four, same technique, you see, are talking about their conversions. And one of them says, I converted because I was accused of a crime. I couldn't prove that I had not committed it. And I was given the option of conversion, and I would have been spared. So of course I converted. I converted to escape this sentence. Second one says, it's not me. My parents, they were Orthodox. They were so repressive, they drove me crazy. I converted just to spite them. The third one says, I don't understand any of this. I fell in love with a Christian girl. The only way I could marry her family would accept me, the only way I could marry her is to convert. So of course I converted out of love. The fourth one pulls himself up straight and says, excuse me, unlike you, I converted out of the conviction that Christianity is a religion of a higher order. Oh, please, say the others, tell it to the Goyim. See how much anxiety there is behind this, right? All the reasons for which, and there are many more, you can stretch that joke out with more reasons. The final thing is this twist where the one reason that no one would believe, right, is that you actually believe in this conversion. So this releases the aggression while acknowledging a certain submission, acknowledging that something is going wrong in Jewish life and that there is something to worry about. And then this whole notion of who is a Jew. Well, this is not new either. This is this is with us from the time of the beginning of modernity, what we call modernity. And there are innumerable and marvelously complicated jokes about the beginnings of the Reform movement, of the beginnings of the Haskalah, of the Enlightenment, when Jews began to leave their communities. So this is one I heard, a version I heard from Hillel Halkin, who is a wonderful translator and writer who lives in Israel, and he told me this. So a small town Jew is on his first trip to Warsaw, and he decides to spend a Sabbath with a notorious heretic, a notorious apikoros, heretic from his own town. He wants to see what apostasy really looks like at first hand. So he's surprised. He's invited by this man on a Friday evening for Shabbos. So he goes with him, and the man asks him first to accompany him to shul with him. He goes to shul with his apikoros, comes back with him, and they sing, he kisses the mezuzah, they go in, they sing Shalom Aleichem, he makes Kiddush, they wash, they make a blessing over the challah, they eat a traditional Jewish meal, and afterwards they even say they bench after the meal. Everything is exactly as he's done it in his hometown. And then at the end, the head of the household goes over to the sideboard and he blows out the Shabbos candles. small town is absolutely stunned. He says, I don't understand. If you're a heretic, why don't you violate some more serious commandment? Why don't you mix dairy with meat? Why don't you eat pork? Why don't you visit prostitutes? Why don't you take your Shabbos? He said, the heretic smiles condescendingly and he says, those are things any goy can do. So this is a joke which makes a strong case for a Jewish education. It's saying to you, you know, even to be a heretic, you really have to know. This is an in-joke for those who really are inside the community. And it tells you that even to be a heretic, you know, what is it? Anybody can do that, but it takes skill to do it properly. So this kind of joking about the anxiety, are you in or out? So these circulated even before coming to America, but in America they really took hold. A man comes to an Orthodox rabbi and he says, Rabbi, am I allowed to make a bracha on a Christmas tree? And the rabbi says, what's a Christmas tree? And then the question is put to a Reform rabbi, and the Reform rabbi says, what's a bracha? Now, believe it or not, I gave a similar talk at a Reform congregation, and I did not understand, this is my stupidity, I did not understand that Reform Jews would take this badly. So this was not appreciated. But at the other end of the spectrum, about this same nervousness, how about a Haredi joke? A man was walking across a bridge and he saw another man standing on the edge, about to jump off. He ran over to him and he said, stop, don't do that. Why not? Asks the man about to jump. Well, there's so much to live for. Like what? He asked. The man said, well, are you Jew or Goy? The guy says, Jewish, he answered. Man said, me too. Orthodox or Reform? Orthodox, he says. The man says, me too. Haredi or modern? Haredi, he says. The man says, me too. Are you Litvish or Hasidish? Litvish, he says. Wow, me too. Litvish Yerushalmi or Litvish B'nai Brak? He says, Litvish Yerushalmi. The man says, me too. Are you Litvish Yerushalmi Musernik or are you Litvish Yerushalmi Brisker? The guy says, I am a Litvish Yerushalmi Musernik. The man says, me too. Are you Litvish Yerushalmi Musernik Slobodkanik? Or are you Litvish Yerushalmi Musernik Kelmer? The man says, Litvish Yerushalmi Musernik Slobodkaniker. Apikoris, the man says, and pushes him off the bridge. So, this is a little different from the one-liners. A long build-up, and see a different kind of in-joke. And so this is about fratricidal opposition within the community, and only people who are that close to one another can feel such an intense aversion for one another. So it's not just that they're joking about the guys who are going outside the community, but also joking about people who stay inside the community. And in the book, I try to bring examples of jokes that you can't even tell because they depend on movements, on the way you know what you do with your actions. That anybody who's in will understand them, but other people will look at you in amazement and they don't even understand, they don't begin to understand what this humor is about. So let's just think of the way in which humor can work both to the good and in a problematic sense. So, to some extent, this kind of humor, I would say, I'm suggesting, gives us a kind of sense of moral security. It really builds this idea of a community that enjoys one another, that has the same moral posture, because many of these whose jokes have something to do with morality at their core. So when I wrote this, a lot of people get in touch with you and they ask you questions and they tell you jokes, and most of the jokes you've heard 100 times before. But there was one letter I received, an email, a long email I received from someone, which was really quite extraordinary. And the man writes as follows. In 1938, my father was one of a large group of Polish Jews in Germany who were sent temporarily to the border town of Zbonjin. And this was to preempt a mass expulsion from the German Reich, which was happening in 1938. The Polish government demanded that all Polish citizens living abroad have to have their passports revalidated, or else they would expire, they would not be permitted into Poland. And so you had these Polish Jews thrown out of Western Europe, not able to enter Poland. And this is why they were going to Zbonjin. And apparently, this man's father, with his two brothers, were being driven by an SS officer to Zbonjin. And this SS officer, this is still 1938, so this SS officer was very, very sadistic and was mocking them all the way. And he said, the problem with you Jews is that you have no culture. To which my father, Otto, answered, we have no culture? When you were still swinging from trees, we were already homosexuals. This is really, now, you see, this would seem to require, when you were swinging in trees, many people have heard this, ending with something, we were already studying the Talmud. This is how you would expect this to enter. But the twist at the end is a twist which is against Nazi culture, which hated homosexuals, but was, of course, ridden with homosexuals. And no one expects that ending, which is really the boldness of the joke. So Otto happened to have survived. The brothers did not. But this joke, this is the joke that the father, that Otto told his family. This was something that he kept with him all those years, that this was something, this was a way of getting even. This was a way of Jews remaining, keeping their moral sanity when they couldn't even preserve their lives. And one of the cornerstones of my book is something that I read in a collection of sayings from the Warsaw Ghetto. You know that in the Warsaw Ghetto there was an astonishing historian by the name of Emanuel Ringelblum. And Emanuel Ringelblum organized an Onik Shabbos, what he called an Onik Shabbos. This was a euphemism. You were not allowed to collect Jewish materials to educate Jewishly in the ghettos. So surreptitiously, he trained a whole group of former journalists, of scholars, to go around and to record absolutely everything that could happen in the ghetto. What was happening in education, what was happening in religious observance, what was happening in the artistic world, what people were saying, how much things cost, what people were eating. This is one of the great, most amazing research projects undertaken, and as you may know, this material was buried in great milk jars. 2 of the 3 collections were recovered after the war. The 3rd is lost forever, but those 2 collections are just incomparable with the kind of information they bring about day-to-day life in the ghetto. And it was the job of one of these researchers to write down what people said. And here's one of the things that he wrote down. A Jew says, God forbid that this war should last as long as we Jews are able to endure it. This is one of the most, it may not hit you right away with the same power. What you would expect someone to say is, God forbid that this war should last longer than we are able to endure it. But this Jew says, God forbid that this war should last as long as we are able to endure it. In other words, Jewish endurance
is so extraordinary that it will not even end with the war that is there to destroy the Jews. It's an astonishing sentence, and it comes from these real depths of irony, of incongruity that have been developed over the years. And as the rabbi said, I think that the origins of it may very well be with Sarah in Genesis, when God informs her through messengers that she is going to have a child, and she is way past the end of her menstrual periods, and her husband too, and she says, can I have a child, and my husband at this age too? And one of my more cutting friends says, there is the first, before Philip Roth, there is the first joke about erectile dysfunction. Not very kindly, but what is Sarah laughing at? Sarah laughs when she is told. She laughs, and God is infuriated about this laughter. And then she says, I did not laugh. And God insists that she did laugh. So it's a very, very odd exchange. But the exchange is so important, because what is she saying? She laughs because there's an incongruity between what she knows from her own biology, from everything that she knows about life, cannot happen, and yet faith tells her, God tells her, it is going to happen. I think that this is the crux behind all these paradoxes that we live with. That you live with the idea, that you live with faith, that you cannot give up, that you do not give up, when everything in Jewish life sometimes tells you it's the opposite. As Shalom Aleichem puts it in the mouth of Tevye, Ata b'chartonu mikol ha'amim, thou hast chosen us from all the nations. Was hast du gewollt von dein Volk Israel? Why did you have to pick on the Jews? This irony, this is what one lives with. So that's the profundity of this subject. On the bad end, I would say, is the problem. It becomes cheapened. It just becomes professionalized. It becomes professionalized, humor becomes professionalized in the Catskills, at the Borscht Belt in the 1930s, and after that. And then people are reaching for laughs, and they will reach for laughs with cruder and cruder material. I see that even there, for example, synagogue announcements will go like this. Join us for our celebration after services. Prayer and medication to follow. Remember in prayer the many who are sick of our congregation. I upped my pledge. Up yours. Don't let worry kill you. Let your synagogue help. Like this. They're very funny. I mean, they're sort of one-liners. But you can see that a surfeit of this happens when you rely too much on humor. And when the humor really becomes thinner and thinner, Jews know less and less. They can't do the thick jokes anymore. They can't do the jokes that rely on a great deal of knowledge and a great deal of information. So they just reach for less and less, actually. And humor becomes, in a sense, for those who really like the textured stuff, less and less important in that way that I described. And then we have this, many years ago, in the 60s already, there's an American sociologist, Sig Altman, who noticed how often references to Jews in the popular media were perceived as funny, even when there was no humor intended. And he concludes, and he did a study of this, he started to watch television and listen to radio all the time for Jewish references, and he really did a study that showed that almost any time there is a reference to the Jews, and especially to Yiddish or to anything like that, ha 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 ha, huge waves of laughter. somebody asks, how did you find that out? And the guy says, I looked it up in the Encyclopedia Judaica. An explosion of laughter, as if there was something really funny about a Jewish encyclopedia. And so he says that that there's something wrong with this. There's something wrong when a people makes a joke of itself, and when a people invites laughter at itself, really as if it were a legitimate object of laughter, not just to itself, but exclusively an object of laughter to itself. And so Sholem Aleichem says at the end of one of his darkest stories, laughter is good for you. Doctors prescribe laughter. It's very funny that Jews always quote this. Jews who know Sholem Aleichem very often quote this. My mother used to quote this and say, laughter is good for you, doctors prescribe laughter. They didn't read the story when this was the end of the story about a Jew who had gone mad through going through a joke too many times, had actually been driven to madness. And Sholem Aleichem, at the end of this story, who is the guy who made more people laugh than anyone in Jewish literature ever, Sholem Aleichem says, dear reader, you know this is not how I like to end stories. You know that I always like a happy ending to stories, because laughter is good for you. Doctors prescribe laughter. There's no one who can be laughing at the end of that story. And yet, the compulsion to turn it to humor is so great that Jews took the punchline of that story, the ending of that story, as a real prescription to go on laughing. So it's interesting that, that from the mouth of one of our greatest humorists comes a confession at a certain point that I can't keep it going. You know, that there are times when the darkness comes and one has to really admit to its presence, and one cannot pull it like a rabbit out of a hat. And so what he tries to do is to impose it on it, but as if to say, this is not something that you can rely on always. And I will end with what the rabbi said at the beginning. If I wanted to tell a Jewish joke, I think that I would probably say, isn't it a joke when the Pew report tells us that 43% of the Jews, as the rabbi correctly said, believe that a sense of humor is essential to Jewishness, as opposed to 19% who say that some form of Jewish observance is essential to Jewishness. 19% versus 43%, that may be the joke that one is stuck with when all else is said and done. So I hope not. But anyway, I'll stop there and see if there
These are some questions that we received for you.
Your diabetes joke was very telling about the nature of the Jewish psyche. Why do you think being neurotic is so common in Jewish culture? This is a wonderful question. I would suggest that, you know, there are days like today, you know, I get a lot of email messages. So I get an email message today telling me that at Harvard, which is where I taught, so people still keep me apprised of everything that happens there, they have just decided the kitchens, you know, all the food services that serve Harvard students have decided that they are going to boycott SodaStream. SodaStream, you know, SodaStream is the manufactures this wonderful product that's been created, and it is manufactured in Israel with Palestinian workers and with Israelis working together in the factories, and it provides a lot of people with labor, but it is on the wrong side of the green line, so-called green line. And so Harvard faculty for Harvard Food Services has determined to you know, not to use SodaStream anymore. You know, one would say in Yiddish, "Can you sugar there?" You know, you can go crazy. It's the nuttiest thing that one can imagine. You know, you have the Jewish people, you know, who are, you know, in the same decade that 6 million Jews were destroyed in a catastrophe, in a murder so fantastic that a new term, genocide, had to be created. The term was created in 1942 to deal with an unprecedented human situation. So in that same decade of the 1940s, the Jewish people goes and reclaims its political sovereignty in the land of Israel after 2,000 years. This is a miracle. You'll forgive me in the synagogue to say such a thing. Greater than any miracle in the Bible. There's never been such a phenomenon in human history. And this amazing country that brings in millions of its refugees, and is the most decent country on earth, etc., etc. And is this small liberal democracy within a sea of Arab autocracies, and that this is the country whose product Harvard services should not be using. I mean, I think that you can go crazy. I think really madness would be justified, because it is madness, and to have to live with that as a Jew and to face this situation, this is almost an intolerable situation to be in. So I would say that there is a way in which neuroses of this kind, having to live with things which do not fit together in any reasonable way, for people who believe in reason, right? For people who want to believe in reason, and who want to believe that there is justice, and who want to have a kind of want to live with a sense of you know, human normalcy and decency. I would say that neurosis is a pretty you know, decent answer. Okay, so with the establishment of the State of Israel and a new type of Jewish existence, has that changed the nature of Jewish humor? Did I write these questions? These are wonderful. These are terrific. So this was really, the fifth chapter of my book is about Israeli humor. And it begins with the fact that everybody thought that with the creation of the State of Israel, Jewish humor as we know it, as I've been describing it, would disappear, because the Jews would now face their problems, and they would face them head on, and they would not have to resort to irony, and they would not have to resort to ambiguity, and they would not have to resort to double entendres, and they would just face them. Well, the joke is, in a way, on us, because, of course, the people of Israel began to experience the same insanities that Jews had experienced in the diaspora. It was just as easy to organize politics against Jews in a country as it had been to organize politics against Jews who were dispersed in many countries. And so you have in Israel, slowly but steadily, the same kind of humor exactly as you had in European societies. Exactly the same kind of humor emerging, and sometimes even bitterer. So in my book, I have the following story that was told to me by my sister-in-law when she came back from a trip to Israel. She said, "Ruth, they were rolling on the floor, when somebody came and said, so there's this suicide bombing in Tel Aviv." And you should know that there are hundreds of Jewish jokes that begin with, there was this pogrom in Kishinev, or there was this pogrom in Rodno. So that's how Jewish jokes begin. There's this pogrom. So now you have this joke that begins, there was this suicide bombing in a cafe in Tel Aviv, and a woman hears about it on the radio in Jerusalem, and her cousins in Tel Aviv live right next to that cafe. So she calls up in a panic, and she says, Are you all right? And the cousin in Tel Aviv answers and she says, yes, thank God, we are all right. And the woman in Jerusalem says, and what about Anat, who is the teenager who used to hang out at that cafe? And the mother says, oh, Anat! Anat is in Auschwitz. Rolling on the floor. Now, you have to know, put it all together. You ever hear of March of the Living? Yes. Well, Israeli school children, Israeli teenagers, all go on the analogy of the March of the Living, and they all go and spend their time in Auschwitz. So here you have Auschwitz, the most charged word in human discourse for danger, for murder, right? But the teenager of Tel Aviv, who could have been blown up in a cafe, is perfectly safe because she is on this trip to Auschwitz, right? So I don't know that whoever asked this question, whether this answers the question, has the establishment of the State of Israel developed a new type of Jewish humor? But I think that this tells you that Jewish humor is alive and well, unfortunately, in Israel. Realizing the importance of humor in everyday life and business, how can one learn that skill? Oh my gosh. Well, you can't. What's that? Seriously, it's not, you can't learn it. This is a kind of an impulse in some people to turn something and to turn it to a humorous advantage. Some people just do it so compulsively, and others cannot learn this. So I thank you so much for this opportunity to share my